Control. Control is one of the most common toxic habits in relationships, though it rarely appears obvious in the beginning. It often starts with small comments disguised as concern. One partner questions what the other wears, who they spend time with, or how they use their free time. Gradually, personal freedom begins shrinking. The controlling person may believe they are protecting the relationship, but underneath that behavior is usually fear, insecurity, or the need to reduce uncertainty. Healthy relationships require trust and individuality. Once control replaces trust, emotional tension slowly becomes constant because one person begins living under silent pressure instead of emotional safety. Constant criticism. Criticism becomes toxic when it shifts from discussing behavior to attacking identity. Instead of addressing specific problems calmly, one partner repeatedly points out flaws, mistakes, or weaknesses in a way that damages self-worth over time. The comments may sound small individually, yet repetition changes their emotional weight. Humans naturally remember negative emotional experiences more strongly than positive ones, which is why ongoing criticism slowly reshapes confidence inside relationships. In many toxic dynamics, criticism becomes a form of emotional dominance. One person maintains power by making the other feel inadequate, creating an unhealthy imbalance that slowly erodes emotional closeness. Silent treatment. Silence can sometimes create healthy space during conflict, but the silent treatment functions differently. Instead of calming emotions, it becomes a tool for punishment and emotional control. One partner suddenly withdraws communication completely, refusing to respond, explain, or engage. The uncertainty created by silence often causes intense emotional anxiety, because humans naturally seek resolution during emotional tension. Historically, social rejection has always affected the brain deeply because belonging once influenced survival itself. In relationships, prolonged silence can feel emotionally destabilizing. Problems remain unresolved while emotional distance grows larger with every ignored message and unanswered conversation. Jealousy manipulation. Jealousy itself is a normal human emotion, but manipulation begins when someone intentionally uses jealousy to create control, validation, or emotional reaction. A partner may flirt openly, mention other people repeatedly, or create unnecessary insecurity to test emotional importance. This habit often creates confusion because moments of affection become mixed with emotional threat. The relationship starts revolving around fear of loss instead of emotional trust. Over time, constant jealousy manipulation exhausts the nervous system because emotional stability becomes unpredictable. What initially feels like passion may slowly become emotional instability disguised as love. Gaslighting. Gaslighting damages emotional reality itself. One person repeatedly denies events, emotions, or experiences in ways that cause the other person to question their memory and judgment. Small situations become distorted. Feelings are dismissed as overreactions. Conversations are rewritten after they happen. The term itself comes from an old psychological thriller, in which a husband manipulated his wife into doubting her perception of reality. In relationships, gaslighting creates deep emotional confusion because trust in personal perception slowly weakens. Eventually, the person being manipulated may rely more on the other person's version of reality than their own instincts. Emotional withholding. Healthy relationships depend on emotional connection, reassurance, and openness. Emotional withholding happens when one partner intentionally removes affection, warmth, vulnerability, or emotional support to create distance or power. Conversations become emotionally cold. Affection appears only conditionally. The relationship begins feeling emotionally transactional instead of emotionally secure. This habit often develops in people who struggle with vulnerability or fear emotional dependence. Yet withholding affection creates emotional starvation inside relationships because emotional intimacy cannot survive where emotional availability constantly disappears. Scorekeeping. In toxic relationships, conflict slowly turns into competition. Scorekeeping happens when one partner mentally tracks every mistake, sacrifice, or disappointment to use later during arguments. Instead of resolving issues, emotional history becomes ammunition. A forgotten anniversary may suddenly return months later during an unrelated disagreement. Acts of kindness become emotional debts instead of genuine care. Relationships built on scorekeeping lose emotional generosity because every interaction feels measured and recorded. Over time, both people stop feeling emotionally safe enough to make mistakes, which weakens honesty and emotional openness. Passive aggression. Not all toxic behavior appears openly hostile. Passive aggression hides anger beneath indirect behavior. Sarcastic comments, subtle insults, avoidance, exaggerated politeness, or intentional forgetfulness become ways of expressing resentment without direct confrontation. This creates emotional confusion because tension is constantly present without being fully acknowledged. Healthy communication depends on emotional clarity. Passive aggression blocks that clarity by forcing people to interpret hidden emotional messages instead of discussing problems honestly. Eventually, frustration grows because unresolved emotions continue circulating beneath ordinary conversation. Dependency. Emotional closeness is healthy, but dependency becomes toxic when one person loses emotional independence completely. Their mood, confidence, identity, and stability become entirely dependent on the relationship. At first, intense dependency may feel flattering because it resembles deep attachment. Over time, however, emotional pressure grows heavier. One partner becomes responsible for regulating the other person's emotional world constantly. Fear of abandonment begins controlling decisions, reactions, and communication. Relationships function best when two emotionally stable individuals choose connection freely, not when one person feels emotionally incapable of functioning alone. Boundary violations. Boundaries protect emotional safety, individuality, and mutual respect. Toxic relationships often involve repeated violations of those boundaries. Privacy is ignored. Personal space disappears. Emotional limits are dismissed. One partner may pressure the other to share more, tolerate more, or sacrifice more than feels emotionally healthy. Boundary violations slowly teach people that their comfort no longer matters inside the relationship. In emotionally healthy partnerships, boundaries strengthen trust because both people feel respected as individuals. Without boundaries, resentment quietly grows beneath the surface, even during moments of affection. Blame shifting. Blame shifting prevents accountability by redirecting responsibility onto someone else. Instead of acknowledging harmful behavior, one partner turns every conflict back toward the other person. An apology becomes an accusation. A concern becomes a defense argument. This habit often develops because accepting fault feels emotionally threatening to some individuals. Yet relationships cannot grow when accountability disappears completely. Blame shifting traps couples inside repeating conflict because the original issue never receives honest recognition. Eventually, conversations become emotionally exhausting because resolution feels impossible. Love bombing. Love bombing creates emotional intensity so quickly that it feels overwhelming. Excessive affection, constant attention, dramatic promises, and emotional urgency appear early in the relationship before genuine trust has time to develop naturally. At first, the attention may feel deeply romantic. The emotional high becomes addictive because humans naturally respond strongly to validation and excitement. However, toxic love bombing usually involves imbalance. Once emotional attachment forms, the intense affection suddenly decreases or becomes conditional. This creates confusion because the relationship shifts rapidly from emotional abundance to emotional instability. Many toxic dynamics begin not through obvious cruelty, but through emotional intensity that grows too fast to remain healthy. Avoidance. Some toxic relationships survive physically while emotional honesty disappears entirely. Avoidance happens when difficult conversations, emotional needs, or relationship problems are consistently ignored instead of addressed. One partner changes the subject, withdraws emotionally, or delays important discussions repeatedly. Conflict may appear minimal on the surface, but unresolved tension quietly builds underneath daily life. Emotional avoidance often develops from fear of confrontation or discomfort with vulnerability. Yet unresolved emotions rarely disappear on their own. Over time, Avoidance creates emotional loneliness because real intimacy cannot exist where important emotions remain permanently hidden.